One common interview question that you might get is something along the lines of log all pairs of array. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, if we had an array, let's just say boxes, and this array is just contains boxes numbered 1 through 5. Now, this array, if I want to log all pairs, it means that I want to log 1, 2, then 1, 3, then 1, 4, then 1, 5, then 2, 1, then 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5, so on and so forth. How will we go about doing that? And if you want, you can pause the video and try to attempt this problem yourself. Now, in this case, what we want to do is, well, we create a function and we'll say log all pairs of array that receives an array. Let's just say array. So we're descriptive here. And in here, we will do a for loop. So for let I equals 0. And we've done this before. So if I is less than the array.length, and we'll increment I. Now in here, we want to loop. So now in the first iteration of the for loop, we'll grab 1. But then we want to loop through the boxes again and log 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5. So we have another for loop. And this time we'll say let j equals 0 if we want to loop from the beginning. Or I could even say 1 if we want to start off with 1, 2, because we're starting off at index of 1 right here. For now, we can just leave it at 0. And we'll say that as long as j is less than array.length, and we'll increment jj. And now finally in here, I can just say console.log I and j. Let's run this function and see what happens. Oh, I have to actually call this function. So let's do that. Log all pairs of array, and I'll give it the boxes array. Oh, and we want to make sure here that we're logging out the actual items and not the index of the array. So we'll just say array I here and the array j here. And just so you don't get confused with the numbers, maybe we'll change these into letters so that it's more obvious what we're doing. C, D, that's not D, that's D, and we'll say E. So if I click run here, we see that we're logging all pairs. AA, AB, AC, AD, keeps going until EE. You can see the log over here. What is the big O of this? And this is something that you're going to see a lot of in interviews. And a good rule of thumb is if you see nested loops, that means instead of having 2 for loops, one after another, where we use addition, when you see loops that are nested, we use multiplication. So this becomes O of n times O of n, which when we multiply them becomes O of n squared. O to the n to the power of 2. And that's a good rule of thumb. And if we go back to our graph, this function that we just created, and I'm using the ES5 syntax here instead of the for loops we did, this O of n squared is what we call quadratic time. That means every time the number of elements increase, so let's say we have 2 elements, we have 4 operations that we do. If we have 3 elements, this actually increases quadratically. That means instead of 4 operations, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Because we have 3 elements to the power of 2. And you see here how the line is now bent and it increases, well, quite fast. If we go back to our big O notation, or big O graph, we see that O of n squared, well, it's horrible, as in it's pretty slow. As the number of elements increases, the number of operations increases significantly. And a lot of interview questions are questions that ask you to solve a problem that initially is O of n squared and make it faster by perhaps making it into something that is a bit low over here, that is bad, fair, good, excellent, but definitely not horrible. If we go back to our rule number 3 that we were discussing, different terms for inputs. Well, going back to that example we had in the previous video, remember this? Well, we said O of A plus B because we had 2 different arrays or inputs. Now, if these loops were actually nested and they're not one after another, the big O would have been O of A times B. And that is rule number 3. Making sure to know that we have different arrays, that means different notation for each array because we don't know the lengths. And an easy rule of thumb is any step that happens in the same indentation, so one after another, you add. And anything that happens with indentation that is nested, you multiply. So again, different inputs should have different variables. Let's move on to the last rule in the next video.